Good morning. Welcome back to our Ag Tech Tuesday webinar series. Today, we're focusing on even more trial results from the 2021 eFields report. We have 5 excellent speakers lined up, and I'm really excited to see what they have to share with us. Just a little housekeeping up front. Today's session is recorded, and we will share the recording with you via email after the webinar. All of our videos from our webinars this winter are available as well on our YouTube channel. So feel free to check those out if you have time. Along with those links that we'll be emailing you, you'll receive a brief survey to get your feedback on this webinar series. We would love to hear from you. Throughout the webinar, if you have any questions for our speakers, feel free to pose those using the Q&A feature. The Q&A button is located at the bottom of your webinar screen, and you can type your questions there. We will hold all questions until the end of the webinar after all the presenters are finished, so hang on till then to get the answers. Feel free throughout the webinar to interact with panelists as well as your fellow attendees using the chat feature. At the end of the webinar today, we will offer 1 hour of Precision Ag CCA CEU credits, and we will share that code at the end of the meeting. If you would like to follow along with any of the presenters today using the eFields report, it is available online. You can scan the QR code in the bottom right corner of the screen, and that will get you straight to the report, and you can follow along. Many of our presenters, I'm sure, will provide the page numbers. This report does summarize nearly 250 trials that were conducted across Ohio in 2021. So a lot of great information that you can dig into even beyond what you're seeing today. So we'd like to get today kicked off. Our first speaker is Dr. Aaron Wilson. He is the OSU Extension climatologist, and he's going to provide an overview of the 2021 season and hopefully some information of what we can look forward to in 2022. So I'll hand it off to you, Aaron.
Hi everybody, this is Aaron Wilson, OSU Extension climatologist, here to take a look at the 2021 growing season weather for the eField on-farm research program. Certainly a pleasure to be with you today. Hopefully you had a great 2021 season. Now is a great time to look back, reflect a little bit on last year, and then I'm going to give you a little sneak peek of the upcoming spring season as well. So overall, if we look at 2021, it was the 5th warmest year on record for the state of Ohio, going back to 1895. And what you're seeing on your screen are the average temperature on the left, the daytime highs and the overnight lows on the right, and their departures from those from the long-term average. So not just the average temperature was warmer than average, but also our daytime highs and really the overnight lows, especially in summer and early fall season as well. So overall, again, the 5th warmest year on record last year. It was the 29th wettest year on record as well, back to 1895. The graph on the right, the figure on the left is showing areas where we see anywhere from 30 to 50 inches of rainfall last year. Now, both the middle figure and the right-hand figure are showing western half of the state was wetter than average. The eastern half of the state was generally drier than average for the year. But during some seasons, there was some pretty big extreme flip-flop between dry and wet conditions out there. Now, of course, we don't experience weather that way. This is a graph showing our daytime highs and lows in the gray bar, and also the daytime record high in the dark red and record low in the blue, for one station, for Columbus, Ohio here. So we can use this to pinpoint the variability throughout the year. So we had a glancing blow from the polar vortex last February, just about a week of extreme cold temperatures, but outside of that, it was fairly mild for the winter. We followed that with a very warm March, and then near record cold in our late spring, April, and then certainly again in May. We had a pretty mild summer overall. It was warmer than average. I'll point out a graph here showing some peculiarity with July, but we had warm overnight lows during late fall into our late summer into fall. Cooler than average November, followed by record warm December. It was the 2nd warmest year on record in terms of our December. So a very big, high variability across the year, which we typically see, but some extreme variability in there as well. So we came off last winter drier than average. It was the 23rd driest winter on record. And the Northwest counties particularly were fairly dry. And a lot of times when we come out of winter with dry conditions, our soils can warm up very rapidly. And I think that lended itself to a very warm March. We had our 12th warmest March on record. Highs, our temperatures anywhere from 5 to 10 degrees above average, as you see on the left. But we also had very extreme cold temperatures in May as well. So anywhere from 2 to 5 degrees below average in May. So even though statistically it comes out to a fairly average spring, we had high variability. 47th coldest spring, even though March was very warm. And again, that late season cold, we saw some, late April, certainly early May freeze conditions across the state still as late as about the 20th of May. So pretty late conditions in some locations for those last freeze dates here across Ohio. We also had the driest spring on record since 2013, again, lending itself to out of the gate getting a little bit warmer. End of April, we had 70% of the state covered in abnormally dry conditions and almost a quarter of the state in moderate drought conditions. So something we hadn't seen really much of the last decade. And that led to a bump up in our suitable fieldwork days. This is a graph showing how October in orange and April in blue have changed in terms of the number of fieldwork days in Ohio. And we generally lost 5 days in October and April. Last year, we had a little bump up there, as you see, in terms of those conditions. So overall, a declining trend in the suitable fieldwork days, but last year we were set up pretty well. We talked about the strange July. This is showing our daytime highs in the middle that were cooler than average, and our overnight lows were warmer than average across much of the state. So wet conditions led to warmer overnight lows and cooler daytime highs. And we also had a lot of wildfire smoke in the sky, and that can help create more diffuse radiation versus more direct radiation from the sun. And that can also keep the daytime highs a little bit cooler than we would normally see. And then we ended out the season, very warm conditions in fall, again, 5 to 10 degrees above average for many of the counties across the state. Some of the warmest October that we've seen for many of our sites as well. And the faucet really turned on in Northwest Ohio. So if you're living in that part of the state, you know that September, October brought a tremendous amount of rainfall, really hampered fall activities up there, getting the harvest out with some of the wettest Octobers on record for Fulton, Williams County, Lucas County, Henry, and Defiance as well. So overall, we had a pretty good season for 2021 from a weather standpoint. Drier early season allowed us to come out of the gate pretty fast. Timely rains in July helped a lot of folks, even though we had some lingering dryness throughout the summer. And then the dry conditions over much of the state in the fall led to good harvest, except for those counties across the Northwest. Now, as we look into early look of spring 2022 here, we certainly expect warmer than average conditions across the region for our spring. This is February, March, and April. And with the La Nina in place, we're expecting wetter than average conditions. So with a wetter soil out there, typically it takes a little longer for those soils to dry out and to warm up. So I would lend myself toward patience with this forecast, with this projection for the spring. Certainly looking warmer than average, but probably wetter than average, especially in the southwest portion of the state. So with that, I'll end with a beautiful photo that really will be here in no time, a much more optimistic photo. The weather gives and the weather takes, as we know, but hopefully last year you had a great season with the conditions that we saw, and hopefully you have a great season this year. So thanks for allowing me to spend a few minutes with you, and I'll turn it over to Elizabeth. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. I really enjoy your insights every year. I think weather is one of the most important variables that we're dealing with. And you not only give us the ability to provide context to the trials that we've conducted, but also you give us a heads up on what we can expect each year. So I really enjoy working with you. Thanks. Our next speaker is Dr. John Fulton. He is a professor in the Department of Food, Agricultural, and Biological Engineering, and he's going to share some results from his trials looking at prescription generation for seeding.
Thanks, Elizabeth, for that introduction. As she mentioned, my name is John Fulton. I want to share a little bit about one of the studies that's been ongoing, investigating variable rate corn seeding. You can find our results on page 126 and 127 of the current version of the eFields. And this study was conducted in Miami County, Ohio. A couple of quick things about the 2021 study. We planted this field on April 27th, harvested it on October 20th. In terms of this field, I would characterize it as a high variability field, in particular for soil texture, soil moisture holding capacity, and that includes organic matter. When you look at those, it's a highly variable. So it's potentially a good candidate for something like variable rate seeding. As far as the field characteristics and practices, it's irrigated, has a pivot, it's conventionally tilled with a pass in the fall and then in the spring, a field cultivator run just in front of the planter. Corn soybean rotation on an annual basis. And then for this year, we planted Ebert's 6883 hybrid for this particular study. Some things to note about the weather. Really good growing season here in the central part of Ohio. You can see that in the rain events and the rain accumulation, especially in July and August, when normally we can have some dry spells. But you see, we had pretty consistent rain events and good quality rain when needed. And so really maintained the yield potential as far as corn in this particular field. In terms of the actual treatments, we had 5 treatments. We replicated it 4 times in this field. We did a strip trial here. You can see our prescription map that was created. But in terms of, we also not only had our prescription rates as part of those treatments, but we had 4 fixed rates of 28, 32, 36, and 40,000 seeds per acre. Nominally or on average, we know it would be planted at 36,000 fixed rate across the whole field. So keep that in mind. As far as the prescription map over here on the right, you can see these white areas are the low population, which was 30,000, and the higher population was 38,000 here in the green areas. And again, these are high production areas, these green areas, and in particular, if you looked at organic matter map, this you see high organic matters values in these areas. On average, it should be noted that on the prescription map itself, it was calling for on average just a little over 35,000 seeds per acre. In terms of how we did this, we turned the prescription map on, or the farmer did, for the majority of the field. But when we got down to those fixed rates, we'd switch it over in the cab and actually go to manual rates. And then if we were using a 24-row planter, we would actually set this population for the right half, for the right 12 rows, and then the population for the left 12 rows. And so all strips were 12 rows wide and were harvested as 12 rows as well. So, but the thing to make is we ran the prescription map. When we got the fixed rates, we actually switched over and actually manually entered those into the display. As far as verification, and I would encourage people doing this type of work, we had our prescription map. Here is our climate field view cab, our actual as planted map. And you can see again, majority of the field was planted using that prescription map and was met as expected when we look at that up here. And you can see over here in this portion of fields where we actually conducted a study. Again, 4 replications across those treatments. You can see too that we've stuck our prescription map strips in there as well. On the right, here's our yield map. And as you look here in that area where we conducted that, you can see some glimpses that we had some yield differences, and we'll talk about that here in a second. Here's the planter, again, 24-row planter. Again, the right side and left side programmed to the appropriate seeding rate, and that was changed once we made each pass. So here's what it looked like at harvest. Again, taking 12 rows. And then basically using the calibrated yield monitor data to evaluate the treatments across this study site. Down to the results, on the left side, you can see our treatments. Okay, here in the second column, you can see actually our stand counts. To note, we took stand counts across 3 transects of this study site. This is the average of those stand counts. You can see that nominally we were running just a little bit higher than the treatment in terms of what's actually planted. To note here on our RX strips, we averaged just over 35,000 seeds per acre. Again, that was expected. but again, verified when we went out and did our stand counts. Most importantly, over here on the yield results, first, at these lower seeding rates of 28,000 and 32,000, you can see that we were significantly lower in yield. At these higher seeding rates, 36, 40, and then the actual prescription strips, no significant difference. So basically we're right at that 270, just over 270 for all the strips. So kind of the synopsis of this is that at least from a strip perspective, we averaged equivalently at all these rates, but we had some opportunity for seed savings when we looked at the normal 36,000 fixed rate. With that, a few summary comments. First of all, I had a great growing season, good rains as I showed in that weather plot. One observation to make, and I think this is very important, in our 40,000 seeds per acre strips, we'd had some leaning stalks. Again, we were harvesting in October, but I think when we think about assigning rates up in those upper 30,000s, if not 40 or 40 above 40,000, you want to really pay attention, especially at harvest, if you're doing some work on this end. You know, am I seeing some leaning stalks? We also saw some lodging. We've seen some lodging when we're at 40, 44,000 in some prior years. So something to think about. Smaller stalk diameter is the result, but ultimately, we didn't see any yield differences at the 36, 40 and the prescription rates. The real advantage, at least as we've evaluated this in terms of strips, is some seed savings. So just over 35,000. Nominally, we would have been putting 36,000. So there's some opportunity for seed savings out there going to the prescription route. I want to thank our cooperating farmers, Brett, Brandon, and Dale Kenworthy. They've been wonderful to work with. I want to thank Integrated Ag, specifically JD Bethel, who's helped create the prescriptions for us and has worked with us on this study and continues on. And Everett Seeds, providing the seed for this study, and has, like I said, this has been going on since 2017 to kind of lead up to what our prescription map should look like and what rates should be tied to zones. And I also want to put a shout out to Amanda Bennett, who's an A&R educator in Miami County for Ohio State University Extension, and her support and helping out with this as well. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you, John. I think those results are really interesting to see and provide some great insights into how we can do a better job of planning and distributing our seed each spring. Our next speaker is Wayne Dellinger. He is an extension educator in Union County, and he's going to share the results from some high-speed planting trials that he's conducted.
Good morning. This is Wayne Dellinger from the Union County Extension Office, here to speak about two new studies that I did this year with high-speed planting. Did one with corn, which you can find on page 60 and 61, and soybeans on pages 196 and 197. It was interesting how this came about. Just briefly, I had the soybean study already lined up with one of my cooperating farmers who happens to put soybeans on 30-inch rows. So that worked out well. And when I was discussing potential projects and protocols with another one of my cooperating farmers, I brought up high-speed planting that I was doing with the other farmer. And they said, hey, we're really interested in that. We don't think we're using our equipment to its fullest potential. So they'd be interested in doing that and seeing what kind of results we can get. So the objective, pretty straightforward, to evaluate the effect of planter speed on corn and soybean emergence and yield. For the study design, both cooperating farmers had John Deere 1775 NT planters with exact emerge row units. We used constant seeding populations, of course, and both were on 30-inch rows. These treatments were of 4 different speeds of planting: 5 miles per hour, 7.5 miles per hour, 10 miles per hour, and 12 miles per hour. These treatments were randomized and replicated 4 times across the fields. The data collection included emergence, yield, and harvest moisture. Looking a little bit into the John Deere 1775 NT, the first thing we look at is the downforce. And each one of these units on this planter has individual hydraulic downforce. So basically, whatever the operator sets the downforce pressure at, these make the adjustments as they're going across the field. So if you get a couple units in a combine track or something like that, these units will self-adjust per unit to keep that downforce the same pressure. Best thing for this to be a high-speed piece of equipment is the lower picture here with the brush belt system for seed distribution. Seeds are dropped into the brush here at the top and fed down to the bottom where they drop out. Now the plates and the fingers that drop these seeds in and this brush belt are both timed in coordination with the ground speed of the planter. So the slower the planter's going, the slower these go, the faster the planter's going, the faster these go. So everything's perfectly timed. So basically these seeds are dropping at 0 velocity. And so what that does is it keeps the seed from bouncing in the furrow. It keeps the seed from rolling, that sort of thing. So it's basically dropping at 0 velocity, no matter what speed the tractor's going. Looking first at the corn study, again, it was a 1775 NT planter. This particular planter had 16 row units. They were pulling it with an 8295R, which was just under 300 horsepower. It was a DeKalb corn hybrid, planted on May 19th and harvested on November 6th. And both of these studies had used vertical tillage prior to planting. We look at the weather information, they really like the weather that they had this past year. If you look, it's pretty evenly distributed across the growing season. They had just shy of 20 inches of total precipitation and just shy of 3,200 growing degree days. And as a result, you can see their yields here for this particular farm. They just picked this farm up, so they were kind of anxious to see what it would do, and that's why they didn't have a prescription for the seeding rate yet, so it worked out well. But they were, in that above that 200 bushel per acre mark. Now what we see here is our least significant difference is 1.93, so just under 2 bushels per acre. If we look across the treatments 5, 7.5, 10, and 12, we do see a slight difference between 5 and 7.5. We do see a slight advantage there. It's very negligible. If we look at all 4 of them as a whole, we're really not seeing a whole lot there. We're going to see pretty much the same results in the soybeans, but statistically there is a slight difference. But this is one snapshot in time, and we're gonna try to get a year 2 out of this one. If we look at the soybean study, again, the 1775 NT planter, this one had 24 row units on it, pulling it with a bigger tractor, 8370R with 370 horsepower. This was a Bex variety, and planted April 28th and harvested on October 10th. Look at the weather here. This was in the southern edge of the county. So we've got a little bit of heavier precipitation toward the end of the growing season. Not too bad distribution there. About 2 inches less precipitation than the other farm, which was about in the middle of Union County. And growing degree days just a little bit less as well. So not perfect, but really not a bad season, all things considered. So here again, if we look at the yields across the 4 treatments, 5 miles, 7.5, 10, and 12, again, we're seeing at most a 2 bushel difference, and least significant difference is just under 2. So again, this one snapshot in time for us, it's significant, but it's negligible. So the corn cooperator farmers have expressed a definite interest in repeating this study in 2022. I think I'll be able to talk the soybean also into 2022. What we did see is you need a lot of horsepower to pull these planters at 12 miles per hour. The soybean farmer did usually plant right in that 8 mile per hour mark, so they were used to pushing their equipment a little bit further. In summary, basically no significant emergence or yield difference was measured across the 4 planting treatments. With the realization of this, with the corn farmers, they realize more acreage can be planted in less time using the equipment to its fullest potential. Again, they want to see another year, probably before they push it too hard, but that's easily done. And that's what we like to do, is get multiple years of data before we can, come to those valid conclusions. And in conclusion for me, I would like to thank Lee Farms and JCW Farms for their cooperation over the years and for this new study. And again, my contact information is below. I thank you all and have a great day.
Thanks for sharing, Wayne. I really enjoy this trial because it's something that started out as a project that we were doing through the engineering department, and seeing it now be a project that's being conducted in collaboration with farmers, I think is really interesting. Next, we're going to move on and we're going to hear from Eric Rieker. He is the extension educator in Fulton County, and he's going to share the results of a multi-year nitrogen source trial that he's conducted.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks to Elizabeth and the Digital Ag team at Ohio State for allowing me to share the 3 years of corn nitrogen source research that we've done here in Fulton County. I'm Eric Rieker. I'm the extension educator, very northwest corner of Ohio. Our county borders Michigan, and in fact, this research was very close, about a mile away from the Michigan border. If you're following along in the eFields booklet, it's page 102 and 103 is where this data is compiled. Like most eFields research projects or trials, the research begins with questions that producers have, and we're very fortunate on this project to work with Seiler Farms in Fayette, Ohio. Les and Jerry Seiler run a great operation up that way. Very avid no-tillers, cover croppers, and just do a great job of growing corn, soybeans, and wheat in Northwest Ohio. These weren't exclusively their questions, but I'll say really a group of small farmers at one point were sitting around and asking me, what is the best nitrogen source for corn? Kind of comparing. They know there's a slight advantage in price to some of the products on any given year. And so the question was, how will N-source affect my corn yield? Later on, I think Les and Jerry may have been asking themselves a question, is my nitrogen application equipment set up well to compete with other products? They have exclusively been 28% UAN on their farm. Excuse me. So we set up a trial with 4 treatments, basically very popular sources of nitrogen, 28% and anhydrous ammonia, 4600 dry urea, and 4600, which is dry ESN or environmentally smart nitrogen. At this trial over the course of 3 years, 80 to 85 pounds was always applied at plant, either with the planter and the starter and with some pre-emerge herbicide treatment. So the nitrogen budget always totaled up to 210 pounds or 210 units of nitrogen total for each of the treatments. The front half of that was at plant, and then we followed it up with 125 units in the respective products. So 42 gallons of UAN, about 152 pounds of anhydrous, 272 pounds of dry urea, and 278 of ESN, all netting out 125 units. We did try and be very standardized in our protocol. We replicated 4 times over these 3 years, replicated 4 times each year in the 3-year trial. And we also worked really hard at randomizing and making sure that the nitrogen was injected. You'll see on the next slide that we used a variety of pieces of equipment, but all of them trying to get the nitrogen below the soil surface and covered up. So in the top left-hand corner is a Spray King nitrogen toolbar that was eventually set up as you see it now with Yetter 400s, which are a high-speed disc, low disturbance. In the top right is the nitrogen anhydrous bar that we used in all 3 years, courtesy of Countryside Implements here in Lyons, Ohio, and Fulton County. Really nice no-till anhydrous bar. Bottom left-hand corner also had a partnership with John Deere and Chemfell Group in Northwest Ohio to use 2510H or high-speed low disturbance toolbar that can handle liquid, gas, or dry products. For those of you that for those of you who aren't familiar with ESN, there's a picture of it in the bottom right-hand corner. Basically looks like urea with a little bit of a polymer coating or a slow release coating for situations where we don't want that nitrogen to volatilize as quickly. The 3-year results. This project was over 2017, 2018, and 2021. That was kind of a 3-year deal that we wanted to make sure that the results were very accurate In 2017, there was a slight disadvantage to the 28% UAN. You could see the statistical analysis of the letter B indicates that it was statistically significant. However, all the other three products were not statistically different with an LST of about 6 bushels. Then in 2018, it was a slightly drier than normal year. All of our treatments yielded the same, very tight analysis. Numerically, there was a slight advantage to 28%, but statistically no difference. And then we wrapped up this 3-year project last year in 2021. We had no statistical difference in yield across all 4 products. Now, the LSD was a little bit bigger in 2021. We're not exactly sure what that was from, but we did have excess rainfall immediately after application, and July and September were exceptionally wet in Northwest Ohio. So those are the results of the project. I will say that in 2017, the coulter setup was not as you see it in this bottom left-hand picture. I showed it earlier. And I think that was one of the teachable moments, one of the takeaways for the guys at Sulfur Farms. They modified their toolbar to make sure that it was injecting better, and they believe the nitrogen was getting covered up better. And so that was an adjustment that they made, I believe, as a result of participating in the eFields research. The top picture is last summer. When you get this much equipment in the field in the same day, we threw together literally a field day on the fly and sent out on social media, and had a number of people come to the Sulfur Farms and see this work being done. We start out with block number 1, or research block number 1. You can see that in the bottom right-hand corner, where actually all 3 pieces of equipment are making the applications at the same time. Makes for a really interesting field day and a lot of good questions by the people who are most interested. In summary, over the course of 3 years, we found that source continues to be a function of grower preference as it relates to comfort and safety, price, availability, and equipment setup. Corn can uptake any of the sources of nitrogen equally, and this data supports historical small plot data that was done previously. I want to thank Les and Jerry Seiler for collaborating again. If you have questions, you can put them in through chat, or we'll address them at the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. It's been really interesting to see this trial repeated over several years, and how the weather conditions across those seasons and the equipment has affected the results. Our final speaker today is Richard Purdin. He is our extension educator in Adams County, and he'll be sharing the results from a sulfur rate trial that he conducted.
Hello, my name is Richard Purdin with OSU Extension. I am the Ag and Natural Resource Educator and Community Development Educator for Adams County, Ohio. And today I want to present my eFields on-farm research trial for 2021 growing season. My research trial consisted of sulfur application, liquid sulfur application to soybeans at the R1 growth stage. So the goal in this project, or this trial, was to see how the liquid sulfur application of plant affected the soybeans plant growth when it was applied at the R1 growth stage. I also wanted to see yield effect, because at the end of the day, this is what the producer that approached me about doing this on-farm research really wanted to learn, was if liquid sulfur was applied at the R1 growth stage, does it have a potential in boosting yields and returning more revenue to his farm? So Mark Irwin was my participating producer. He approached me about this earlier in the spring. There has been a growing interest among many producers in my county about sulfur and its effect on plant growth, not only soybeans, but corn, wheat, and even hay production. So the planting date that we decided to plant the plots was June 17th of 2021. And right after the planting date, we received about 1.5 inches of rain, of heavy rain at that. So my concern was poor emergence. But as it turned out, we actually had excellent emergence and we had a good stand. And the average stand across the whole plot was 164,750, which was a good a stand for this plot. The weather for 2021 during the growing season can be summed up as warm and wet. We had 18.64 inches of precipitation and 3,378 growing degree days. The treatments, there were 2 treatments, one with sulfur and the other without sulfur application. The plot size was 90 feet wide by 300 feet long. And the reason for that size was 90 feet was the size of the booms, or the width of the booms on the producer's sprayer, self-propelled sprayer. And like I said, there's 2 treatments, one with sulfur and no sulfur, and they were replicated each 4 times. So we had 8 different plots. Application timing was August 17th of 2021 at the R1 growth stage. He also applied fungicide and insecticide across the whole plot at this time. Observation after treatment. After treatment, soybeans applied with the sulfur actually showed a deeper, darker green color and a healthier color than the soybeans without the sulfur, but pod formation and actual flowers, the number of flowers on the plants were not a significant difference between the 2 plots. So the overall results, there was no significant yield response. There was about a 2 bushel response, but it wasn't nothing very significant. The yield for sulfur treatment was 74 bushels per acre, and the yield for no sulfur was 72 bushels per acre. The cost of production for the plot with the sulfur application was $223 an acre, and the no sulfur treatment was $218 an acre. At the end of the day, the producer did make a little bit of money by applying the sulfur, but it's nothing that was significant enough that he would do it across 100% of his acres for the next growing season. If you have any questions on this sulfur trial, you can always contact me at 937-544-2339. That's our phone number here at the office, or call or email me at purdin.19@osu.edu. Thank you. And if, like I said, if you have questions, don't hesitate to contact me.
Thanks, Richard. Sulfur is one of those topics that's really getting popular on farm, where we're starting to see response in some fields, but not others. So I think this research is really important to help us understand what's going on. So thank you again to all of our speakers. At this time, we're ready to start taking some questions. So feel free again to enter anything you want to ask our presenters in the Q&A box, again, located at the bottom of your screen.
You mentioned that, we're expected to have a warmer than normal spring or upcoming season, but thoughts on soil temperature?
Yeah.
And, we're thinking about planting, as you alluded to in your last slide, but what do you think about soil warm up coming late March and April, when we're really starting to kind of consider putting planters in the field?
Yeah, so that's the big question, John. I appreciate the question. So to kind of explain a little bit, La Nina conditions, cooler than average sea surface temperatures in the Pacific, typically mean that January, February, March tend to be wetter than average. Now, we had a cooler than average and drier than average January, but February has been pretty active. December was active. So this winter is a lot wetter than it was last winter, being the 23rd driest winter on record. So as I mentioned in the presentation, wetter soils tend to take a little bit longer to warm up, notwithstanding a year like March 2012, when the variability was so strong. We had 80s right in March, which can quickly turn things around. But if you've got a lot of moisture in the field and in the soil, right now we've got pretty, nice frozen ground, a lot of snowpack. That's going to melt. We do expect an active pattern throughout February to kick in here in about a week or two, with a lot more active systems and probably warmer systems. So as we head into March, I expect ground to be wet, and wet ground takes a little longer to warm up. It takes a little bit longer to dry out, because all that energy that's coming in as the sun starts to get higher and higher in the sky is going into evaporating the water from the surface, not raising your temperature, right? So drier soils will warm up faster than wetter soils. And so I really think that we're going to lag a little bit, I think, and without, a major extreme variability pattern, which we can't predict at this time. I think it's going to be a slow warm up in March. That doesn't mean once we get to April and May, things can't turn around pretty quickly as usual. But I think that March is likely to be soggy, cooler than average in terms of soil temperature.
Appreciate that, Aaron. And maybe while you're on that topic of April, maybe just remind everyone some of the analysis in the past you've run that about working days available and maybe being tight, because that's going to get to Wayne here a little bit on planting, speed of planters and stuff. But go ahead,
so
Aaron.
A couple of things with springs that are pretty interesting is we've seen the strongest both precip change overall, so monthly total, as well as intense events. If you look at the March, April, May, April has those strongest trends across Ohio. So more intense events in April, generally more rainfall in April compared to the trend in March, which is a lot lower, and in May, which is a lot lower. I'm trying to remember. It's about 25% over the last 60 years increase in April precip, but only 15 in May. So it's pretty interesting. You get down to month-to-month differences here. So what we've seen is in May, of course, we've seen a decline of about 5 working days since 1995, suitable fieldwork days reported to NASS since 1995, particularly in April. May is relatively flat, so we're still doing, okay there. And as a matter of fact, June, we've seen a bump up, an increase in suitable fieldwork days for those that want to get really clever with that. But, thinking about those windows, thinking about the equipment, thinking about the timing, there's no doubt that April's becoming more challenging. And, of course, a lot of folks want to get out there and they want to get planted as early as possible. Still have to use caution, obviously, and think about the technology and the things that are available to help us do that.
Yeah. Thanks, Aaron. Like you said, especially when you look at 2021 and the windows we had in April, there was some key windows that could be captured. But Wayne, talking about technology, you got this discussion going on high-speed planting. And I think that means a lot of different things to everyone, or should in my mind. But maybe some comments about what you saw outside the study with the farmer. I mean, are they planting faster? What are some of the advantages they've seen? Anything along those lines? And then the other thing someone texted me was downforce. You talked there not only about the speed tube, but you talked about hydraulic downforce. And is that a necessity when we start talking about that kind of technology?
Yeah. So again, one farmer was planting at a very significantly higher speed than the other. And that's when I was talking about the protocols with the corn farmers. Their eyes lit up and they're like, yeah, we want to see what this can do, because they've been a little, I don't know if I want to say gun shy, but they kind of were keeping at their typical speeds even with the newer equipment, just because they did like the downforce even at the slower speeds. Neither one of the farmers were planting at the 2 higher speeds. So when we had the question about the wear and tear on the equipment, it's still relatively new. They aren't planting at those higher speeds, so it's something we're going to watch. obviously over the years. My comment at the end, horsepower became an issue once we started hitting those higher speeds. So they weren't typically doing that, and they're keeping an eye on field conditions. I've got a text out to the one cooperator with the soybeans on how fast. I'm pretty sure he said he's usually right in that 8-mile-an-hour range for soybeans. But there again, it depends on the field conditions. If they've got a nice flat area, they can really let the horses run. The corn, the field that we actually did the study in, had kind of a wash in the middle of it. And when we were in those higher speeds, it was I was sitting in the extra seat, and the operator's kind of like, you might want to hang on here. So wear and tear definitely is something we're going to keep an eye on. It's a great question. I don't think we're there yet to come to any definitive conclusions on that. Hydraulic downforce, both operators talked that up big. Just the reaction time of hydraulic systems over pneumatic systems. If you read into it a little bit, we're talking about adjustments that can be made 5 times per second. So when you're going even at a regular speed, a typical nominal speed, it can make the adjustments very, very quickly. At the higher speeds, I feel personally it's a definite necessity, because it needs to make those adjustments at that higher speed, 5 times per second, up to 100 pounds difference per second, that it can make those adjustments. And I think you do see, or you would see, if you compared a difference in the emergence, the stand counts that we did. But as a result, since they're both using the same types of planters, when we went out there and did the stand counts, when we went out there and just checked things during the growing season, you could not see any difference in the plots between the 5-mile or the high end. So I think as a selling point, I think they're both really sold on the hydraulic downforce.
Yeah, and I'd agree. One thing about the hydraulic downforce is, if you are going to go faster, and that's a great question about the maintenance, I'll make a comment, but as far as downforce, maintaining contact, it really eliminates any potential of mechanical vibration when you got that hydraulic downforce, keeping that unit engaged with the soil. So, but I guess I want to highlight, just because we say high speed doesn't mean you have to plant 10 miles an hour. I've seen growers, if I've got the speed tubes, I'm going to plant faster, no doubt about it. Now, does that mean I'm going from 5, 5.25 to 6 to 7? Maybe. That seems to be the more logical approach, not jumping to 10. I'm not saying guys aren't doing 10, but whether it's no-till, as pointed out, to conventional till, it's got to work for you. You got to understand your terrain and conditions and see what works. But in general, everyone ends up moving and actually planting faster to some level, but that may only be a mile per hour, too faster.
Right. And I think this equipment, if you look into it, it only talks about up to 10 miles per hour. But for the sake of studying and seeing what kind of results we get, we did have that 12-mile-an-hour throw in there. And your comment about the smoothness, the corn cooperating farmers did absolutely make that comment, that once we started going up to that higher speed, the ride in the tractor was very noticeably smoother than they were at the ones. And they use the analogy of going over railroad tracks. If you go over railroad tracks, some tracks are slow, you're going to hit every bump and it's going to be a rough ride. But once you find out that optimum speed for that set of railroad tracks, you can just kind of glide right over them. So that's something that they definitely noticed with the increase in the speed.
Real quick on the maintenance, there's a group of people right now trying to work on if there's a difference in maintenance costs and update some standards coming out, because new high speed is relatively new. What I will also say is manufacturers have beefed up their toolbars, in particular some of their bushings and things, on those higher speed planters than what was originally when they originally came out too. So there's a couple things, but we're trying to come up, this group, with some new cost estimates. So hopefully in the next year or two, we'll see some of that information come out and be able to answer that question directly. So while we're on planting, a couple questions really good. We'll jump to the variable rate seeding study. And the question came out, and JD, appreciate you jumping in, but how did we come up with basically the prescription? And JD mentioned that we used the integrated ag crop production units, or CPUs, is what they were talking about, which is essentially a combination of yield map data over the years, slope, and then some grid soil sampling that's been conducted in those. What I would tell everyone here, there's two things about creating seeding prescriptions. Number one is how you create the zones. And that's the real critical thing that JD highlighted. How did we come up with those zones? And I would tell you those zones very much track the production potential in those fields. There's two fields there we've been working with. And when in particular, we look at CEC, we look at organic matter, yield, and other aspects that JD, regardless of all the variables we put in, it came down in those two fields. They're highly variable. And some of the areas are highly potential in terms of corn yield. Some aren't, a little bit higher, some erosion per se and things. And so a little tighter soil. So we saw those as lower productive units. The second thing is, once we have our zones, and I think maybe that was the other question we're getting to, how do you tie a rate to that zone? So there's two things. We got to create the zones, and then how do we come up with those seeding rates per zone? And if you go back to that seeding rate prescription, we went everything from 30,000 seeds on the lower end up to 38,000 on the upper end. And this is very important to kind of what we have done since 2017 strip trials. In particular, we've had a couple years of data in that particular field to evaluate what seeding rates tie to those zones. And so looking at that, we decided the 30,000 is kind of the economic optimum for those harder soils, those lower productive in those particular fields, and 38 was the upper. Why we didn't go higher in the case of irrigation was what I was alluding to, in my opinion, when we evaluate those years. When you got up above 38, we started to see instances of lodging that smaller stalk diameter. And so you're kind of trying to optimize. If I was going to make a comment that if I'm going to go above 38 in those particular fields, I think row spacing would have to be adjusted down to something like 20-inch rows in order to get those seeds spread back out and deal with the instances of lodging, leading stalks, those things that we don't want to happen. Because again, I look at 2021, if we couldn't have harvested in October, we waited till November when it was wet, I think we could have had some down corn and it'd make it even worse. So we don't want that. That's something to think about on that upper end. So that's kind of where we came up with the 30 to 38,000, and 38 kind of being our cap, so we don't have some of those harvest issues when we get to that phase of the year. But in terms of what we had tied for the 30 to 36 and everything, we had evaluated, and we continue to build those databases for each one of those fields to figure out what is the economic optimum to put in those zones. So hopefully that kind of helps address some of those questions. But I do want to say thanks to JD for helping us in that zone and talking through what those rates should be. That's a pretty important discussion to have, in particular on those high rates, at least for what we experienced in those fields and in that field that I presented in. So Eric, we got our crop planted, and now we got into some decisions around nitrogen. And I guess one thing we throw out is nitrogen's high priced, and what we're sourcing and what our rates are and things for the upcoming year. Any ideas on a couple fronts? Number one, what you're thinking about for this coming year in terms of actually rates, am I doing some adjustments considering the pricing? And number two, where are you kind of going with some of your research? Because you got a lot going on up there as it relates to some of this fertility kind of management decisions.
Yeah, thanks, John. Lots to unpackage in there. I think in the chat you meant 2022 coming up this year. Thoughts on end budget 2022, yeah. But when and that's how you worded it just now. When I encourage growers to start at the MRTN calculator. I know it's just a starting point, right? And so I think growers are making better and better in-season decisions with some of the tools and the technology that are offered, whether it's sensors or drops or whatever they might be using. But when I plug in 15, we're a pretty big anhydrous area in Northwest Ohio. And when you plug in $1,500 a ton anhydrous and 525 corn, and we might have opportunities better than that. But, you know, the MRTN has given us a rate of 135 to 160. It's going to be tough to sell growers on maybe cutting back that much, especially if they haven't seen the bill yet. But farmers are economic animals. So I think if MRTN's telling you 148 pounds of total end budget, I don't know as farmers are going to go for that completely, but they're going to probably go on the high side of that range, right? And maybe they're going to consider some technology things that allow that nitrogen to get applied later in the season that might increase our nitrogen use efficiency. Those are thoughts and suggestions I have for growers. We believe heavily in the MRTN calculator, but sometime in this particular year that ratchets things down quite a ways when guys are staring at, above $6 cash corn right now. They don't want to leave anything on the table either, but we don't know what that's going to be come the fall of 22. So that's, I guess, the one question. John, other thoughts on that from your perspective?
No, I think you got to be paying attention in anything. My philosophy, I think we talked about a lot, Eric, is at least on nitrogen, get some put out up front, split applications pay, and so
Yeah.
Whatever that split application is, a lot of times I think about plan or side dress. That could be plan or side, mid-season, however that equation or applications need to look. But I think as we move further and further into the season, Mother Nature plays more of the cards, kind of what Aaron alludes to. If we can see more of the cards, can we make some adjustments? This is that kind of year, in my view, to really be thinking about what my nitrogen plan can look like, put some out, and can I make adjustments as Mother Nature plays her cards whenever I'm coming back in season and putting that nitrogen out. So I think there's always an opportunity to make adjustments, if not push the crop in some years. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. There's more and more equipment options available. So, but
I just want to thank all of our speakers today. Really good information for Aaron, Eric, Wayne, and we'll get back on the sulfur information, like I said. But thanks to our speakers, and not speaking, but reach out to them with additional questions. They're always available and have good insights beyond just what they're doing and what they presented today. But thanks to all them for the good information they shared. So anyways, hope everyone has a great week. And as Elizabeth said, we'll have some additional topics coming up. So thanks.